Hi, welcome to the Fair Labor Standards Act, or FLSA, information session. This event is for employees who may change their exemption status from exempt to non-exempt because of the Title and Total Compensation Project, or TTC Project. Closed captioning and American Sign Language will also be offered in the links below in chat. I'm Communications Specialist Anna Vembu-Julian, and I'll also be the moderator for today's update. Before I get started, I'd like to welcome employees, their supervisors, and human resources professionals from across campus to this event. I'd also like to recognize that changing FLSA exemption status can feel overwhelming. And that's why the goal for today's presentation is to provide you with more information on how a change in FLSA status from exempt to non-exempt will impact you. The first part of this session will be a presentation from subject matter experts from the Office of Human Resources. During the second part of this presentation, these experts will respond to commonly asked questions. We're not going to be able to answer every single question you have. However, we do encourage you to visit the frequently asked questions, or FAQs, on the FLSA website. You may also contact your local human resources professional if you have any specific or individual questions. This session will be recorded and can be viewed on the Office of Human Resources YouTube channel after this event. And the recording will also be posted on the FLSA website. Presentation slides will also be posted after this event. And to visit the website, please go to hr.wisc.edu/FLSA. We encourage you to visit this website to find more resources that will be referenced throughout this presentation. That includes the university or academic staff moving from exempt to non-exempt side-by-side chart that we will reference today. I'd like to get started. I'd like to invite and introduce our panelists to come on screen, and I'd like to tell you which topic each of our presenters will be covering. Director of Compensation Administration, Megan Owens, will help us to understand what the FLSA, or Fair Labor Standards Act, is, and she'll also describe what will change and what will stay the same for employees. Office of Human Resources Specialist, Payroll Specialist, Tim Delaney, will explain how payroll and benefit changes will impact you. Senior Human Resources Specialist from Workforce Relations, Craig Hubble, will discuss how paid leave will impact you. Hi, welcome. And Senior Workforce Relations Specialist, Jamie Dregney, will share how scheduling and work hours will impact you. Hi, welcome everyone. Thank you so much for being here today. I'm now going to turn it over to Megan to provide some background information on the Fair Labor Standards Act. Thank you.
Hello and good morning. Thank you, Anna, for the very great introduction. We'd like to thank you so much for joining us today as we walk through some of the changes that will be occurring as a result of your possible move from the exempt status under the FLSA to the non-exempt status under FLSA. To get started, we're going to talk a little bit about what the FLSA is. We're going to talk about what will change, what will stay the same, and then also talk a little bit about how the change will affect you with some great information from the expertise of the individuals that were just introduced to you. Finally, we will be looking at some of the resources that are available in case you would like to follow up or have additional questions. To get started, we'd like to do an introduction into what is the FLSA. You hear that acronym a lot, and some of you may not be as familiar with it or where it comes from. So just a little background, that the FLSA, or the Fair Labor Standards Act, is a federal wage and hour law that was enacted in 1938. It's commonly referred to by its initials, FLSA. The FLSA protects employees against unfair pay practices and includes regulations about the work week. So the 40-hour work week, if you ever wondered where that came from, it came from this act. Minimum wage is in this act, overtime pay, and also regulations on youth employment. Everyone is covered under the law, but some employees are classified as exempt and some are non-exempt based on the job they do. So on the next slide, we talk a little bit about what those definitions of FLSA exempt and non-exempt are. So an exempt job is not subject to the overtime protections outlined in the FLSA, whereas a non-exempt position is subject to overtime protections that ensure that employees do receive overtime pay for hours worked over 40 in a work week. So to outline some of the differences, on the next slide, we take a look at how exempt employees are paid annually or they receive a salary. You might hear of some places that pay a monthly salary, some pay a weekly salary, but it's a salary. And they typically do not receive additional pay for working hours more than 40 in a work week. Whereas non-exempt employees are paid hourly, and they do receive that overtime pay or compensatory time for working more than 40 hours in a work week. The state is, and us being one of those state employees, is fortunate enough that we can award compensatory time, which is time off in lieu of overtime pay. So in order to meet the exemption status, there are 3 criteria that you must adhere to. So if you do not meet these 3 criteria, you cannot be considered exempt from the FLSA. So the first one is that you must be paid on an annual or salary basis. The second criteria is a minimum salary, which we call that a salary threshold. And that threshold amount is $684 per week, or $35,568 annually. And the third criteria is what we call a duty and discretion test. So that means that your job must fall into one of the categories that the FLSA, that the Act provides as being exempt. So you must meet the definition of being defined as an executive, an administrative professional, a professional, or computer professional. Those definitions, again, come from the Fair Labor Standards Act. Regardless of salary, though, I did want to add, since we are an institution of higher learning, that teachers, doctors, and lawyers are always exempt no matter what they make or how they are paid. So now that we have a little bit of background on what the Fair Labor Standards Act is, I'm going to get us started on what will change and what stays the same if in fact your move is made from the exempt status to the non-exempt status. Who is affected? So if your current title is classified as exempt and your new job title with the Title and Total Compensation Project will be non-exempt, your new FLSA exemption status will change to non-exempt when TTC implements on November 7th of 2021. So what does this mean? What's changing? What stays the same? Moving to non-exempt changes how you report time. And our workforce relations team will discuss how that change works into your daily work life when they give out their section of the presentation. It does not change, however, your employee category. So if you are currently academic staff, you will remain academic staff. It also does not change your vacation and sick leave earnings. There is no change in the balances that you will be receiving every year of vacation and sick leave. What will change for these employees is will allow you to earn overtime. So one does now become eligible for overtime earnings. It does not change, however, your job duties. It does not change the supervisor you report to, nor does it change anything in regards to the policies that apply to you. So with this change from exempt to non-exempt, the Department of Labor does require that we do some additional follow-up with you. I just wanted to give you a FYI that come winter of 2022, we will be contacting you again with more information on this need for follow-up. So just wanted to give you a heads up in case you hear from us again in the winter of 2022. that this is to be expected, not a big deal. It's just something the Department of Labor requires us to do. So as we get into our presentation, you should have received, or I hope we all hope you received, a copy of this side-by-side document for academic staff and for university staff. If you have not received yours or you've misplaced yours, not a worry. It is on our website that was provided earlier at hr.wisc.edu/FLSA. Feel free to go there now and download a copy or reference it as we go through the rest of our presentation. At this time then, I'd like to turn the presentation back over to Anna to introduce our next presenter.
Helpful to know that this change for most employees, when they will make this change, will happen on November 7th of this year. So thank you for providing some really good definitions and helping us to understand that really a lot of these changes are going to be coming soon. So I'd now like to invite Tim Delaney from the Office of Human Resources Payroll to explain how this will impact payroll and benefits. Welcome, Tim.
Good morning, everyone. Everyone, when you have any change to your appointment, we recommend that you review your earnings statements. You should be looking at your earnings statements every pay period, but particularly if you have any changes to your appointment, if you've made any changes to your benefits or your tax withholdings or general deductions. This way, if there is an error with your appointment, it gives us a time to correct it right away so that we don't have an issue that carries on for a long period of time. Next slide. To find your earnings statements, they are located in your MyUW portal. So if you go to wisc.edu and you choose the MyUW tab, you will log in with your net ID. You will click on the payroll information widget and select earnings statements. This may also be a time for you to review your IRS withholdings. Your taxes won't change, but again, anytime there's a change with your appointment, we recommend that you review your IRS tax withholdings to make sure that they are appropriate for what your needs are for the remainder of the year. And the best tool available is the IRS withholdings calculator found at the IRS website, and the link is included in the slide. Timesheet changes. You will need to contact your local your HR professional for your questions about how to record on your timesheet. We do this because not all divisions use schedules. Some require their employees to record every shift, and we want the divisions to be able to share that with you individually. For your benefits, what will not change due to the FLSA change is any of the benefits listed below. Basically, your benefit enrollments are not going to change due to your exemption status. Your retirement system will not change either. Your employer, the employee category will not change. The same minimum hours to remain the same regardless of your exemption status. So for university staff, they still use the calendar year from January 1st to December 31st. 1 year of credible service is equal to 1,904 hours. If you are a faculty, academic, or limited employee, or the teacher category, you run in the fiscal year from July 1st to June 30th. 1 year of credible service is a minimum of 1,320 hours. And now we'll go back to Anna for the next presenter.
Thanks, Tim, for sharing some really wonderful resources and for reminding employees to go and review that earnings statement in the MyWISC profile. So just as a reminder to everyone who's listening, presentation slides will be posted online, and all the wonderful links that Tim shared will be accessible online as well. So just, you don't have to scramble to write those down. You can definitely look at the website after this event and find that information there. Next, I'd like to turn the presentation over to Senior Human Resources Specialist, Craig Hubble, who's here to share some information about paid leave. Welcome, Craig.
Thank you, Anna, and hello, everybody. As Anna said, I'm going to talk a little bit about paid leave. I'm also going to touch on overtime a little bit. And with that, we can go to the first slide. And with this first slide, we have a good chart of kind of an overview of many paid leave benefits. And I won't go through it line by line. As Anna said, these will be online, so you can peruse it at your leisure later. I would like to point out a few things, though. In the first column, in the first row, you'll see the types of leave about which this chart is speaking, specifically sick leave, personal holiday, legal holiday, and vacation. So those are the types of leave that this chart covers. A couple other observations. One thing that strikes me about this chart is the amount of things that are not changing. Most notably, there is no change to the amount of paid leave you can accumulate or use. So for example, whatever sick leave you're accumulating now, you will continue to accumulate the same amount of sick leave when you change to non-exempt. One other thing that is not changing, and this specifically relates to non-exempt or to academic staff employees. If you look at the third row and middle column, as academic staff employees who are listening, you know that every month there's a requirement that we touch the time and absence system. If we don't take leave a particular month, we go into the system and we indicate no leave taken. When you switch to non-exempt, that requirement still exists. So continue, if you do not take leave, to go into the time and absence system and indicate no leave taken. So what will change? What will change most likely for you is leave reporting. If you are exempt now, you most likely are reporting your leave in half or full day increments. That will change. As a non-exempt employee, you will report your leave in 15-minute increments. So for example, currently, if you take 7.25 hours of vacation, you report that as a full day of leave, 8 hours. As a non-exempt employee, if you take 7.25 hours of vacation, you'll report that as 7.25 hours of vacation. On the next slide, we're going to go into overtime and compensatory time a little bit. And there are a fair number of details on this that I will cover in this and the upcoming slides. In the big picture, as a non-exempt employee, you can earn overtime or comp time. And a couple of quick items on that. First, a linguistic note. You may hear me say comp time. You may hear me say compensatory time. You may read those different terms in policy or whatever. Please note that they're exactly the same thing. Comp time is compensatory time. There's no difference. In terms of a definition of comp time, what it is it's paid time off, which is earned and accrued by an employee in lieu of or instead of immediate cash payment. So in other words, if you earn overtime pay, instead of getting overtime pay, you may choose to have additional time off through comp time. Next, on the next slide, we're going to go into a little bit the overtime, kind of some of the parameters around overtime. In general, as a non-exempt employee, you are eligible for or will be eligible for overtime if you work more than 40 hours in a week. And a week, as you can see in that first bullet point, is Sunday through Saturday. Those are the days we use to calculate the hours worked. When you receive overtime, it's paid at time and a half. So quick example, let's say that your hourly rate, for sake of discussion, is $15 an hour. If you work 41 hours in a particular week, those first 40 hours would be paid at $15 an hour, and that 41st hour would be paid at time and a half. 15 times 1.5 is $22.50 an hour. Please note that supervisor approval is required before working overtime, before working more than that 40 hours if you're full-time. And also please note, very importantly, that paid leave time does not count as hours worked for this purpose. So for example, if you take 8 hours of vacation on Monday and then you work 40 hours Tuesday through Friday, that's 48 total hours. And you will be paid for 48 hours. However, all of it will be straight time. There will be no overtime because the hours worked is not over 40. On the next slide, talk a little bit about comp time and how it relates to overtime. As a non-exempt employee, as I mentioned earlier, you may be eligible for comp time or additional paid leave instead of overtime. And in the same way that overtime is calculated with a multiplier of 1.5 times your normal hourly rate, same thing for comp time, except the multiplier is applied to the hours above 40. So we'll use the 41-hour example. You work 41 hours in a particular week as a non-exempt employee. So that's 1 hour above 40. So you could get 1.5 times your hourly rate for that additional hour, or you may be eligible for comp time, and it would be 1 times 1.5. So you could get 1.5 hours of comp time or additional paid leave. Some more details on comp time are on the next slide. And couple details, like I mentioned, there's a maximum of 80 hours that can be accumulated for comp time. So if you accumulate 80 hours and then you work more than 40 hours in a particular week, you would get that paid out as overtime as opposed to additional comp time, because it's capped at 80 at any one point. The second bullet point on this slide is very important. I want to emphasize, if you work more than 40 hours in a week, you will get overtime or comp time. However, different divisions have different guidelines for how these things and when these things apply, whether it's overtime, whether it's comp time, when one might apply or the other. So please consult with your local HR to determine how all of this may play out in your particular situation. Please note that comp time is calculated on a calendar year basis for all employees, including academic staff. So it's January 1st through December 31st. And also please note that any comp time credits that one earns the previous calendar year that are not earned or used by April 30th of the following calendar year, those are paid out as cash. So it's not, you don't use it or lose it. You just, instead of, if you have any comp time credits remaining, you would get that paid out as cash. On the next slide, this is largely a review, so I'm not going to go over it in detail, but again, you can review it later on the website. I would like to point out one item in particular, that first bullet point. Please remember that the analysis for overtime or comp time is based on a 40-hour week. It's not based on how many hours in a day that somebody works. So if somebody happens to work more than 8 hours in a day, that in and of itself does not trigger comp time or overtime, because again, it's that 40-hour-a-week analysis. So I have two quick examples here for us. On the next slide is the first one. Just to put this in practice, we have Irene. She works 47 hours in a week. She doesn't take any paid time off. So again, these are 47 hours worked. So Irene will receive 40 hours of pay at a regular rate, and then she'll either get 7 hours of overtime pay, again, at time and a half, or 10.5 hours of additional paid leave, known as comp time. And of course, that calculation is based on 7 hours times 1.5 is 10.5. And finally, for me, one more example on the next slide. Santiago is scheduled to work 50% FTE. He works 20 hours per week. If Santiago happens to work 25 hours in a week, he will receive 25 hours of pay, but all of it will be at straight time because, again, he has not worked more than 40 hours in a particular week. So that's what I have, a little bit about paid leave and overtime. And now I turn it back to Anna to introduce my colleague, Jamie Dragney.
Great. Thank you, Craig. I appreciate how you provided some concrete examples for explaining how overtime and comp time may be earned by non-exempt employees who work over 40 hours in a work week, clearly with their supervisor's approval, of course. And thank you for encouraging our employees who are going through this change to contact their local HR for more details about how this may impact them and specifically how it may work in their area. I'd now like to welcome our Senior Workforce Relations Specialist, Jamie Dragney, on the screen. And Jamie is going to provide us some information about scheduling and work hours. Welcome, Jamie.
Great. Thank you, Anna. Hello, everyone. As a non-exempt employee who's compensated for all of your hours of work, it is important that you understand what counts as work. Anytime that you're performing services for the benefit of the university, you're working and will now need to record that time as work time. Next, I'm going to highlight the differences between work schedules for exempt employees and work schedules for non-exempt employees. Exempt employees who work over 40 hours in a work week do not typically earn overtime or comp time, so they may not need to get prior approval from their supervisor in order to do that. Non-exempt employees, as Craig discussed, must be paid for all hours worked and cannot perform work off the clock. Prior approval from your supervisor is typically needed when a non-exempt employee is going to work more hours than their regular weekly schedule. Supervisors must ensure that non-exempt employees are being compensated for all hours that they are performing work. Non-exempt employees will have a regular work schedule and set number of hours that they work each week. In most cases, non-exempt employees should not work or be assigned to work outside of their regular scheduled hours. Exceptions to this may include if an emergency situation occurs during your work shift and you aren't able to leave at your regular time because you're still responsible to be managing that situation, or if you're not able to leave your work shift until you're relieved by a colleague and that colleague is delayed. You would want to inform your supervisor as soon as possible if a situation like that occurred and you needed to work past your typical end time. There is a rare exception to the requirement to record work hours outside of your regular schedule and receive overtime or comp time, and that's when non-exempt employees engage in de minimis work outside of their regular work schedule. De minimis work time isn't recorded as work time, and employees would not receive compensation. So what is considered de minimis work? It's occasional time spent working outside of your regular schedule for really short periods of time, lasting a few seconds up to only a few minutes. For example, if you would respond to a text from a colleague asking a work-related question outside of your regular work schedule. Your regular work schedule cannot be considered de minimis work and must be paid for those hours worked. Also, an employer cannot randomly decide that work you are doing during your regular work schedule is de minimis and therefore shouldn't count as work hours. Next, I'll discuss how break and meal periods are handled for non-exempt employees. Non-exempt employees remain in pay status for breaks that are 15 minutes or less and during meal periods when the employee isn't completely relieved of their duties. For example, if a non-exempt employee eats their lunch at their desk and continues to be responsible to answer phone calls and respond to emails. Non-exempt employees are not paid for meal breaks when they're 30 minutes or more and the employee is not responsible to perform any work during that time. For example, if the employee is able to leave their work site and eat their lunch at a nearby restaurant. The 30-minute unpaid lunch break would be reflected on the employee's timesheet. The Department of Labor does not require that employers provide lunch or rest breaks. However, the university does have a standard hours policy for non-exempt university staff that includes the following provisions. When a non-exempt employee is working a shift that's more than 4 consecutive hours, but less than 6, they are expected to take one 15-minute paid break. If they're working more than 6 consecutive hours in a single shift, they must take a minimum 30-minute unpaid lunch break in addition to 2 15-minute paid breaks. Lunches and breaks may not be combined to create a longer break or to adjust the start or end time of a work shift. Your supervisor may approve a modification to these provisions, and work units may have their own individual policies. Please check with your supervisor to confirm your work and mealtime or your break and meal times. Non-exempt academic staff do not have a break time and mealtime policy, but it is recommended that they also follow these same provisions. You are encouraged to speak with your supervisor to understand your work unit's guidelines regarding your regular work schedule, the process for changing your work schedule, if you'd be eligible to earn comp time or overtime, and the approval process you would follow prior to working outside of your regular schedule. You'll also want to determine if you would be required to use paid leave time if you're arriving late to your work shift or leaving early, or if flexing your schedule is permitted. Non-exempt employees are responsible to record their work hours accurately and to follow all paid leave policies. Employees may be subject to disciplinary actions if they fail to follow these policies and procedures. Fail to follow may include working less than your regular daily hours without use of leave time or getting prior approval, working more than your regular scheduled hours without prior approval, working more than 40 hours in a work week without prior approval, or knowingly failing to accurately report your hours worked or applying leave time appropriately on your timesheet. Supervisors are also expected to follow all university policies and FLSA regulations. They may be subject to disciplinary action if they allow or encourage employees to inaccurately report hours worked, they fail to follow time and leave reporting policies and procedures, or they allow or encourage employees to work off the clock and not report all hours worked in order to avoid paying overtime or comp time. Finally, I encourage you to talk with your supervisor to be sure that you're aware of how the change to non-exempt FLSA status impacts you in all of the areas that I just reviewed. This includes confirming what your weekly work schedule and hours are, the procedure you'd follow for calling into your shift or notifying your supervisor if you're going to be late, the process for submitting your timesheet and having it approved, the process for requesting to work more than 40 hours in a work week, and what your break and mealtime schedule is. You should also discuss any additional questions you may have with your supervisor or local human resources. Thank you. And back to you, Anna.
Thanks, Jamie. It's really helpful to know that one of the best things employees can do is to have open communications with their supervisors and to continue to have ongoing conversations about expectations in their area. So thank you so much for sharing that information. Before we invite all of our speakers to come on for the panel portion of this event, I'd like to take a moment just to share a few resources that the team has provided today to help employees, supervisors, and local human resources understand these changes. So first of all, as we've mentioned quite a bit throughout this presentation, that a lot of the information shared today can be found on the website at hr.wisc.edu/FLSA. And one of the best resources for employees is their supervisor and local HR contact. And all the session materials will be posted and available later today on the website. And so if we go to the next slide, I'd just like to share a few helpful resources. And again, these links will all be available in the presentation slides. And as we reviewed changes to overtime, there is a link to the overtime policy. There are links to leave benefit policies, including sick leave, vacation, personal and legal holidays, as well as standard hours and break time information that Jamie reviewed. There's more details in Chapter 14 of the work schedules. And then there's also a Office of Human Resources, or OHR PowerPoint that goes through compensation and hours worked. And then Jamie briefly touched on volunteering versus working hours, and some more details are available in the links below, including the same type of services defined as well as the overtime policy. And so I'd now like to invite our speakers to answer some commonly asked questions from the team. And so it looks like our first employee question is for Compensation Director Megan Owens. And this employee would like to know, they say, I'm concerned that my job will be seen as less professional because it is moving or has moved to a non-exempt status. So I'd like to invite Megan to speak a little bit more about that.
Sure. Thanks, Anna. And that's a great question. So the university, first, I'll just say the university values all employees, regardless of exemption status. We have outstanding professionals across this university that have nothing to do with exemption statuses. So I'd love to put that out there. The definitions that I provided earlier on what an exempt employee is included those words of professional. I will say it's an unfortunate definition and use within that statute because it does imply that those who are non-exempt are not professional. But I do want to just let everybody know that that perception that those people that are non-exempt are not respected professionals is completely inaccurate at this university. It does not determine an employee's contribution, value, or service to this university. So FLSA, as I said, it's a federal definition. We need to use what they provided us, but it really is not the way that we interpret or value our employees.
Thanks, Megan. I think it's really important to reinforce that really it takes every employee working together to make this university work, and really thinking about the contributions that everyone makes to this institution. It really takes all employees working together and to support our students and research. And as a world-class public research institution, I'm really pleased to hear you say that the university truly values all employees, and that this is really about the FLSA Act and the labor laws that we're going to follow. So really appreciate that information. So our next question is a question about this employee would like to know, why is my FLSA exemption status changing if my job responsibilities haven't changed? And Megan, I believe this question is also for you.
Sure. No, makes sense. And a good question as well. So really good questions coming in so far. So so with the TTC project, we created those standard job descriptions. And those standard job descriptions went through multiple reviews to determine the Fair Labor Standards Act status, whether they would be exempt or non-exempt, so that we are in compliance with the law. So including, reviews not only by the Office of Human Resources, but we actually also had a third party, an independent party, review our standard job descriptions and also take a look at what their determination would be based upon the language in the standard job descriptions. And then we discussed it and arrived at our determinations. So as a result of those reviews, those are the exemption statuses that were assigned. Employees then went through a mapping process and had conversations with their supervisors about what title best described their job responsibilities. And as a result of those mappings, were then assigned what could be a new exemption status under the Fair Labor Standards Act. So that is why your FLSA status would be changing. However, even though your job responsibilities haven't changed.
Great. Thank you, Megan. That's really helpful to have that context for that. And I do encourage all employees, if they have questions about the TTC project, to visit the TTC Project website. And that is also available in some of the links that were shared today. So, and it's also available on the FLSA website, so you can get to it through that. Our next question, I believe, is for Tim. And so, Tim, this employee would like to know, when can I get overtime pay or compensatory time or comp time, as Craig called it?
Anna, for employees who work more than 40 hours in a week, they are eligible for overtime or comp time. Non-exempt employees are required to be compensated for all hours worked. So if the employee works up to 40 hours, they would be compensated monetarily for straight time. If they work more than 40 hours in a week, then depending on their division's practice about awarding comp time versus overtime, they would be eligible to be paid overtime or comp time at the premium rate of time and a half for anything worked over 40 in the standard work week of Sunday through Saturday.
Great. And then Tim, can you just kindly remind me what straight time means? Is that just the regular hourly rate? Is that correct?
Correct. Straight time is your regular hourly rate versus the premium rate of time and a half.
Excellent. Thank you so much. Appreciate that. So our next question, I believe this employee has a question for Megan. And so Megan, this employee would like to know, will staff be forced to switch classifications from academic staff to university staff?
Hello. Thanks, Anna. No, employees are not required and will not be asked to switch their employment classification as a result of the Title and Total Compensation Project. Your change in FLSA status would not indicate or would not be a move to university staff. Your benefits under the academic staff would remain the same.
Great. Thank you, Megan. Appreciate knowing that that will remain the same. So it's nice to know some things aren't changing. So our next question, I believe, is for Craig. And this employee would like to know, does the university expect me to complete more than 40 hours of work in a 40-hour work week? That's a great question.
Thanks, Anna. That is a great question. The short answer is no. You should not be required to complete more than 40 hours of work in a 40-hour work week. In general, you should be provided with sufficient time to reasonably complete the work you are assigned in that 40-hour work week. That being said, if you believe that you have insufficient time to complete the work in the allotted time period, please consult with your supervisor. And you and your supervisor may have ideas, may be able to brainstorm solutions to that challenge. I don't know what that would look like in your particular situation. Some possibilities include maybe you and your supervisor could talk about prioritization, what needs to be done and when. Perhaps you have some ideas about making processes more efficient. It's possible that the supervisor may be able to assign tasks to other employees. The supervisor may be authorized to approve overtime or comp time. So there are a variety of options. Please touch base with your supervisor if you believe you do not have time. But to answer the question again, no, there is not an expectation that as a non-exempt employee, you will need to complete more than 40 hours of work in a 40-hour work week.
Great. Thanks, Craig. Again, it sounds like the message is really having those open communications with your supervisor is really important during this time, especially as employees are going through these changes. So appreciate you letting us know about that. The next question that we have, I believe, is for Tim, is this employee would like to know, what if a supervisor doesn't approve or refuses to approve a non-exempt employee's time? Will that non-exempt employee get paid for the time?
Anna, non-exempt employees must be paid for all hours worked. If a non-exempt employee works, they have to be paid for those hours, even if they were unauthorized or not pre-approved. While there may be disciplinary consequences to the employee for working unauthorized or unapproved hours, the supervisor cannot refuse to approve the hours just because the time was not pre-approved. If, on the other hand, the supervisor fails to approve time in a timely manner or runs into errors when submitting, it is the responsibility of the Department or Division Payroll and Benefits staff to take action to ensure the employee payment to the employee. If you have questions, please reach out to your local department or payroll coordinator.
Thank you, Tim. That's really good to know that we can always contact our local HR professional if we do have additional questions. So thank you so much for that. This next question is related to the question that was just asked, and it is actually, I believe, for Jamie. So I'm going to invite Jamie to come on the screen. And this employee would like to know, what if they don't mind working more than their regular schedule without being compensated? Can I volunteer my time and work more than my regular weekly schedule?
That's a great question. So the answer to that is no. As Tim stated, again, non-exempt employees must report all the hours that they do spend working and be compensated. De minimis work that I mentioned earlier is the only exception to that. As state employees, we are required to follow the statutes and regulations regarding volunteering. So in order for an employee to volunteer their services, those services cannot be the same type of services that the individual is employed to perform for the public agency. Whether volunteering is not of the same type of service the individual is employed to perform depends not only on what the written job duties of the employee are, but also the duties and responsibilities that are actually assigned to that employee. Performing the same or similar job duties as the position you're hired to perform without receiving compensation is not allowed. Thus, when permitting an employee to volunteer, it's best practice to place them in a volunteer role that is as separate and distinct as possible from their written as well as actual job duties.
Thanks, Jamie. And I appreciate you providing us some of the context that there are actual, provisions from the state of Wisconsin that outline what volunteer work is. So that's great information. And I do know that at the end in the resources that we shared today, there are links to more information about volunteer versus actual work. So thank you so much for providing that information. Our next question, I believe, is for Megan. And this employee would like to know, they say, I keep hearing people say that my FLSA status may change. And if so, that it could happen. Hasn't this already been decided? This is a great question.
Sure. Thanks, Anna. As I referenced in our very beginning of our presentation today, the implementation date for the new titles is November 7th of 2021. We do know that there are some employees who are still kind of talking with their supervisors about the new titles, and that there may be some employees who may have their titles changed before November 7th of 2021. And so since we don't know who are in those situations, we want to just make sure that we're saying that nothing is final yet, but if it does become final on November 7th of 2021, that these are the impacts that you would be experiencing.
Great. Thank you so much, Megan. And one thing I think that I can confirm for all employees is that they should continue to read articles such as Working at UW and Campus Communications for more information about the Title and Total Compensation Project. I know that we'll have more communications out. And so I think that will help employees to understand a little bit more and have more information about those changes. So really appreciate that. This next question, I believe, is for Craig. And so, Craig, we're going to invite you to come on the screen. And this is a clarifying question. And this employee says, I think I heard Craig say that the switch from exempt to non-exempt status will not impact the amount of sick leave that I can accumulate or use. Craig, is that accurate or correct?
Great clarifying question. Yes, that is accurate. The switch from exempt to non-exempt has no impact on the accumulation or use of sick leave, personal holiday, legal holiday, or vacation. So that change from exempt to non-exempt does not impact accumulation or use of any of those types of paid leave.
Great. Thank you, Craig. This next question, I believe, is for Jamie. And this employee would like to know, can employers still allow employees to work from home or have flexible schedules? And I believe when they say employers, they're referencing probably their area or their division.
Sure, that's a great question. The answer to that is yes. With supervisor approval, non-exempt employees can still be permitted to work from home or remotely, and also to potentially have a more flexible schedule. As I mentioned earlier, if someone has a regular schedule where perhaps they typically begin their work shift at 8 a.m., but on that particular day are going to be arriving later with permission from their supervisor, they may be able to start their work shift at, let's say, 8:30 and then work a half an hour later so that they wouldn't be taking any leave time during that day. They'd still be working the same number of hours in the day. Again, with supervisor approval, both of those things would be allowable.
Great. Thank you, Jamie. It sounds like, again, as you mentioned earlier, having that open communication with supervisors is really important. So appreciate you sharing that information today. So I believe that is the end of our employee questions for today. And I would like to thank our panelists for joining us. And I'd also like to thank the Office of Human Resources team that's been working hard behind the scenes. And I'd like to thank Aaron Stern for his help in providing website support and for also running the tech behind the scenes today, as well as Stephen Catania. I'd also like to thank those on the FLSA work group, including those who presented today, as well as Beth Gelhar, Chris Calkins, Jennifer Westmiller, and I'd like to thank my colleagues, Tina No, for helping us to run the behind the scenes information and helping us to gather employee questions. And I'd also like to give a very special thank you to Kelly Novak for all of her help and support in really being the producer for today's event. As I mentioned, we know that not every single question every single question that was asked today can be, answers can be found within the presentation slides, and the recording will be posted after this event. And so as a reminder, please do visit hr.wisc.edu/FLSA. Continue to have open conversations with your supervisor. And if you have specific questions that apply to you, we encourage you to contact your local human resources office. We are all committed to making this transition as smooth as possible. We know that there are a lot of changes, and so we do encourage you to visit the website for more information. Thank you so much and have a wonderful day.